Good evening, everybody. All you wonderful people that are come to our book launch of El Porvenir Ya, which is the first book of its kind. It's an all Mexican-American writers production. Probably the idea of even having a book that's just one group, let's say one ethnic group, might not have been considered some years ago. But it came to us as in a dream, not a nightmare, but myself and the folks with Somos en Escrito Literary Foundation came up with the idea and we decided to go with it. Tonight, we're here at the Medicine for Nightmares bookstore in the heart of the Mission in San Francisco. You can't get more San Francisco-ish than being here. I've known the Mission for many, many years. Used to hang out here when I was in college. And here I am still hanging out in the Mission for many, many years. This particular place is also called Medicina para Pesadillas. It means the same thing as medicine for nightmares. We can't go into how that all came about. It's a very dreadful story, but that's what I'm told. But we're here, and we're very glad. We're very thankful to the owners for having us here. Particularly Ricardo Tavares, who is handling tech for the bookstore. Scott Duncan Fernandez, who is also senior editor of Somos en Escrito. We hope that you enjoy the presentations. Now, the way we've set it up is we have, of course, we have some of us are here in person, Ricardo, Scott, and myself. A few others are being taped in or virtual because of course, COVID. However, I have to announce two people who were on the list, Carmen Baca and Rudy Garcia, will not be with us, even virtually. Carmen lives in New Mexico, and her home was almost burned out by the fires. I talked to her today, and all they had was severe smoke damage and lost a lot of food and what have you, because the electricity was cut down, burned out, along with some towers, so there's no Wi-Fi in her area. Imagine being off the grid. Rudy Garcia had to have some medical, some surgery, and he's not really able to speak too clearly. He says his voice is getting garbled. I never noticed any difference, but so those two, unfortunately, won't be with us. I must say that Carmen Baca is actually working with Somos en Escrito to publish her next book about the old cuentos, old Hispano cuentos of New Mexico. Really, we just published him last year with a book called Death Song of the Dragon Chicxulub. That'll be available here soon, I hope. We're going to be starting with Martin Gil Ortiz, who is with us. Martin, are you ready?
I'm here.
Okay, good. Let me give you a quick introduction. Martin is originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico. He teaches pharmacology, I believe, at the Ponce Health Sciences University, and lives in Puerto Rico. He has had 3 novels published, including Never Kill a Friend, along with over a score of stories in print and online journals. He was a finalist in the 2020 Andres Montoya Award. He's a member of MWA, the Florida chapter. Martin, would you like to introduce your story and give us a reading?
Okay, you can hear me well? Okay, I saw a nod or two. Then it's interesting. My story is so short that I'd be able to read it in whole. I think it's about 5 minutes in length. It is hard science fiction. I decided to write about the possibility of living on Mars, and I did this when I learned on Mercury. I did this when I learned that Mercury has ice caps for its poles, and being so close to the sun, that I thought that was incredible. So it struck me that there are parts in Mercury that must be temperate enough. Also, the fact that it is so close to the sun, and having lived in the New Mexican desert, I kind of understood the appeal to this new land, and I imagined that a diaspora of Hispanics would be settling on Mercury. So that's the background to the piece. The piece is called Ap Hell. When Mercury is closest to the sun, we call that perihell. Nobody from the big three comes to visit us during those days. Fortunately, we have a fast orbit with a lot of wobble. We go from the near point to far in 44 Earth days, from a hot kiss of 46 million kilometers to a positively refreshing 69 million. That far point, the aphelion, the aphel, that's when we get busy. Every cargo ship swings by like we were some sort of canal on the way to the far planets. They drop down their battery shuttles, and we give them the best cheap charge in the solar system. Where else can solar farms compete? Venus with its cloud cover, Earth with its walled off nations and ever constant energy wars, Mars, where the sun is just a fly speck. The small size of our planet requires a much more leisurely escape velocity for the visiting ships. The slow rotation of the planet allows them to park for hours and hours on the border of night and day in a benign climate, not too hot, not too cold. I knew Drusk from our time together at Baffin U. Like most Earth natives, he sneered at all other planets. He owned a fleet of 5,000 freighters, a big deal on his home world. Their cargo runs made him rich enough to afford a mansion in the Himalayas. Siamara, you had so much promise, he said. How did you end up here and with a family? The days can melt metal. Only the soft metals, I responded with a caddish smile. The nights can freeze air. We have no atmosphere. Never any sandstorms. We were riding aboard the Sols Trans, a massively broad train on multiple tracks. It circled Mercury at the 75th parallel north, where the temperatures never raged. Hell, the poles even have a permanent ice pack. At this latitude, the circumference was only 5,600 kilometers. With the Mercury day being 1,410 hours, our transit lopes along its tracks at 4 kilometers an hour as it follows the rising sun, always staying ahead of the freezing night. When perihell came near, we'd spend a couple of weeks in the tunnels. Let me show you a project we've been working on, I told him. I fired up an ion Piper, a 2-seater, and he joined me in the cockpit. We skimmed past La Dauphine and Carnegie rupees, over vast solar farms and pock desert lands. In my mind, these were the most beautiful sights in the universe. From the look in his lifeless eyes, I could tell it made no more impression on him than the deadland scars of Brazil. Up ahead, a huge cone mountain. My God, he said, it's a barnacle. I've heard of them. Heard of them? This was only the second one. The first, a colossal disaster, caved in before completion. I said, we drilled down through the crust to the mantle and insert a 100-meter wide titanium tube. The pressure as the molten iron rises lifts the crust, creating what is essentially a kilometer-high volcano. Then before the portion of land overturns into long night, we release an eruption of iron from its central vent. The iron coats the earth in crust. After it spends a Mercury night freezing, we excavate the interior rock, and we built ourselves a vast shelter from the sun, one in which we'll be able to fill with thousands of living spaces. Doesn't the iron coating turn the interior into an oven? Heat transfer without atmosphere requires photons, and the interior is shadow. Interesting, was all that he could muster. Drusk turned down my invitation to move here. The only reason I asked was to hear him say no. It gave me a smug satisfaction that no one from the distant worlds understood. Earth dwellers cling to their planet with such arrogance. They believe it is so precious that they are willing to destroy it just to hold on to a piece. I was born in the northern Sonoran Desert. I know the beauty of the desolate and the promises of diaspora. Here in the deserts of lands of near I know the beauty of the desolate and the promises of diaspora. Here in the desert lands of Mirkuru, we have all the energy we need to create a better world. Ap, a prefix meaning separate, distance. What is the furthest thing from hell? Aphelion, Aphel. I stood with my husband and daughter in the sky deck of the Sol Trans, watching the sun balancing on the horizon. As we slowly followed it, it was always dawn. I'll also say for this piece, I just wanted to have something that was positive too, and kind of uplifting, that maybe there would be a future where people found a peace in a land that is a little bit overly hot. Thank you.
The readings continue. The diversity of the anthology, not only in terms of subject matter, but just the settings and the way that our writers have treated these various stories that they've come up with. Next, we have Ricardo Tavares, who hails from Watsonville, California, now lives in Oakland, and has an MFA from San Francisco State. He's part of La Brigada, a collective that organizes the International San Francisco Flor y Canto Literary Festival. His writing has appeared most recently in other anthologies, as well as in Somos en Escrito magazine. He's the tech person for the bookstore, and right now he is doing some tech stuff. So we'll give him a moment to get together. And meanwhile, I do want to remind folks that at the end of the readings, we're going to have an interview conducted by I have a new microphone too. Is it working? Can you hear me? We'll have an interview conducted by Michelle Wallace, a writer of her own right, talking with the various writers that we have with us virtually and in person. I think she's prepared with some pretty awesome questions, and we're looking forward to that. I think Ricardo was about ready.
Yes, I'll switch it over to the front there.
Okay. You want to give us a little bit of context and then go into your reading?
Sure. You know, I think like a lot of writers, we mine our experiences, places we've been to, people we know, right, for material. Okay, and this story was inspired when I worked as an archivist at Arhuli Records here in El Cerrito. If you're not familiar with Arhuli, check them out. I helped for a short time with the Frontera collection. So I worked with Juan Antonio Cuellar, who's like, been instrumental in archiving this massive early Tejano and border music collection that is housed like in UCLA now. But he did that, and I believe he's still kind of maintaining the collection. But yeah, it was a great time to be there. It was a great time to be there. It was when the collection was bought by the Smithsonian, so now it's at the Smithsonian. So just being there for that transition and learning about the musicians, the history, just a very rich place that I still go to and visit every now and then. So with that said, early border music, archiving, that's kind of like the starting point. How much?
About 8 minutes.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah.
And it's aptly titled The Archivist. Sunlight filtered through frayed blinds on faded pictures of forgotten musicians in concerts. The archivist paused, sipped coffee, then turned his eyes to a shelf where a specific tape reel was filed. The lettering on the slim box had faded since the last Great War, but he was able to make out the letters that had been written by a steady hand. On most boxes, there were song times, titles, studio locations, band personnel, and if you even had the time of day when the song was recorded. The box that held his attention had a name written in florid letters. Each letter led beyond the top and bottom margin of the framed labeled notes. The first letter, C, swirled at the top and at its base flowed into the next letter, A, that bloomed and that quickly melted into an R. It was at the third letter that he paused to sip water and take a deep breath. Before tracing the last 3 letters, he retraced the first 3 letters through as though confirming the pen strokes, then continued. The R became a vine that crept into an M, then sprouted into a sudden but neat E. Then, after tracing the last letter N, he whispered the name. He could almost see the pen in the singer's hand as she wrote her name, Carmen. Perhaps the box rested on a music stand as she wrote her name. One hand holding a cigarette, or it might have been after a concert in a Texan ballroom. He conceived scenarios where Carmen was mobbed by fans, or with a radio host answering their questions, or with her sister singing into classic chrome microphones with a band roaring their latest chart topper. It was an overcast December afternoon near the San Francisco Bay, while he shelved records and cassettes, when he turned his ear to a doorknob click. He stepped softly along the short hallway and peered around the corner. Dion scribbled on blank labels, shuffled paperwork, and wedged notes into a clipboard. "What record label are you archiving now?" Dion asked as he flipped through pages, waiting for an answer. "I'm on Ideal," he bellowed down the hall, hoping Dion would be satisfied with his answer and returned to the front office. Ideal? Okay. Dion looked around aghast. "Well, can you please keep this place clean? Jeez." He muttered, his boots hammered down the stairs as he bounded back to his office. Alone again, he returned to the archiving station and pulled a reel box from the shelf. He lifted the tape gingerly, nested it in the supply column, then clicked an empty reel into the opposite side. He unwound a length of tape from the supply reel to thread it along the tape path into the capstan's rubber pinch roller and plunged it into the playback head, then guided the tape into the slot inside the playback reel base. A tiny bulb flickered green as it powered on. He turned a knob that made the bulbs glow orange. Needles and 2 faded BU meters skittered with every knob click. He skimmed the tape box where scribbles or notes made by studio personnel. He lay inside the box. His heart raced instantly. It must be a musician list or suggested song sequence, he thought. Studios often included invoices, jukebox sales distribution numbers, or musician names with the reels. A deep crackle filled the room. Slow breathing from a singer preserved for 50 years erupted into a barrage of coughs, clearing their throat. He closed his eyes and imagined the guitarist plucking string harmonics while a drummer tapped on a drumhead, gradually tightening the snare. A raspy voice counted down. Uno, dos. Accordion notes revved slowly until lightning fast arpeggios fired up the band and the guitar strummed staccato chords. With eyes closed, he could see studio lights gleaming, power cords tangled across the floor, and tube amplifiers glowing. The archivist memorized every note, and between songs he eavesdropped on conversations whispered near microphones. Near the end of this tape, musicians chatted about who was going to drive the truck on Friday night. Someone asked the guitarist to pluck an F note. He sat frozen between two eras, observing the tension to keep the tape from overstretching. He didn't exhale to keep from missing faint whispers or instrument clicks. Vocalists counted down each take with cut 1 or cut 2. Oftentimes it was just the breath before the band roared into the room where he sat. He couldn't remember when the recordings absorbed him, but he remembered the moment when Carmen's voice first reached out to him from 1952. Thank you, Armando. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Ricardo. I have seen archivists, radio people working exactly the way that you described, Ricardo. So it took a lot of I think effort, maybe research to be able to do that, but you brought back a real picture to my mind of those times. I'm showing my age, I guess. We have up next a man who is, many people call the father of Chicano science fiction. I've called him the father of Chicano science fiction. Ernest Hogan is the author of several novels, including High Aztec, Smoking Mirror Blues, and Cortez in Jupiter, on Jupiter. His work has appeared in various magazines, periodicals, and anthologies. He was born in East Los Angeles and now lives in Arizona. Ernesto, I turn it over to you. Give us a little context and your reading, please.
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess I'm going to keep on and might as well. My story is really short, so I'll read my story. And this story was actually inspired by my first ventures out of Aztlan, up north on Highway 1 in California, up into to Oregon and Washington, and where I kept noticing that we're starting to colonize up there. I'm seeing more Mexican restaurants and more, and we're into what I call Sasquatchlandia, because we see Bigfoot all over the place there, and it just sort of the story is sort of explaining how the future is going and all that. So I think I should probably just get in here and read that for you. It's called "Incident in the Global Barrio." Bert rushed to the corner where the employee in the bullfighter's jacket told him that the bathrooms were, and skidded to a halt. Like the rest of the place, it glowed in bright colors, in images of villages, beaches, jungles, and deserts, Villa, Zapata, and the Virgin of Guadalupe. That were all alien to him, especially when it was snowing outside. He may as well have been an astronaut setting foot on another planet. He looked around and scratched his cap that was faded and worn from red to dull pink, with the name of an obnoxious president who had crashed and burned after one disastrous term. "I want to see the manager, damn it," he screamed. A very short, dark-skinned, 30-something woman walked up to Bert. She was dressed in a white huipil decorated with lots of colorful embroidery, and her hair was tied up in two buns that hid her ears. Her appearance knocked Bert for a loop. You're the manager? I expected a fat, bald guy with a gray mustache and maybe a sombrero. And what's with your hair? You trying to be Princess Leia? She smiled. I'm sorry for not being your stereotype. George Lucas actually based Leia's hairdo on the way female fighters wore theirs in the 1910 Mexican Revolution. How may I help you? Bert squinted at her badge. It said, Shoshi, manager. Xochitl, like the name of this place? It's pronounced Shoshi. The TL is silent. He heard something when she said the TL, but for the life of him, he couldn't bring to describe it. I don't know much Mexican. You probably mean Spanish, said Shoshi. It's Nahuatl. Shoshi is Nahuatl. Now what? One of over 60 languages spoken in Mexico. The language of the Aztecs. It means flowers. Bert looked confused. What did you need help with, sir? Well, I had to go to use the facilities. When I asked, I was told to go this way. And when I got there, the doors don't say men and women or gentlemen like in most places. Shoshi looked at Bert in the bathroom doors and suppressed a laugh. Damas means ladies and caballeros means gentlemen. Caba. Why isn't it spelled that way? The alphabet is slightly different in Spanish. Bert gritted his teeth. How come you can't just use English? Sir, why did you come here? I like the food. I'm glad that you like our food, our Mexican food. Sure, it tastes good. It smells like heaven and makes my mouth water. As long as the chili ain't too hot. Bert looked at his lips and swallowed the saliva that was building up in his mouth. But, this is America, and you should be using, English words. Shoshi smiled. One of her canines peeked out from her now curling red-painted lips. That and the look in those black eyes made Bert nervous. You have any trouble ordering from our menu, she asked. No. Most of the items are non-English names, she said. She suppressed a laugh. And all the prices are written in Arabic. He thought about it a while. Oh, yeah. See, you already have a vocabulary in Spanish and other languages. And what we have here is a chance to add to it, which will come in handy with the way the world is going. I wish it could go back to the way it was before you could easily get Mexican food in this state. Yeah, used to be you couldn't get much Mexican food up here in Washington. Sasquatchlandia, Shoshi interrupted, outside of Aslan, almost Canada. Bert grimaced, and he had to admit Shoshi was really easy on the eyes. That smile of hers. Well, he shrugged at the colorful Mexican decor. This is all nice, the food and stuff. Shoshi stepped closer to him. Her smile let him know how sharp her beautiful teeth were. Does stuff include people, Mexicans? Bert tried to look like he didn't take a punch in the gut. Well, after all, if you like our food and our decor, you should like us. He couldn't help letting out a squeal. We see more of them. You these days, and I sure do like to make me some enchiladas. Well, you can't get good Mexican food without Mexicans. This place is a real success. We're expanding, becoming a chain. My wife is setting up an app where she can allow people to order on their phones and get it hot and biodegradable packages delivered by drones. Drones, he said, kind of scary, like sci-fi. My son loves them. He already designed and built his own robots. It's just that things keep changing. Suddenly, we've got to learn other languages. People who look different and talk different come in and take over. It's like an invasion. Her smile brightened. I like it. I like it that there are more people here who look like me. Welcome to the Global Barrio. Global? Yes. We hope to open up franchises all over the country and then other countries. And who knows, maybe eventually we'll have a galactic barrio. Galactic, Bert repeated like a robot. My wife says that she's a dreamer, but she said I'm a dreamer. But then that's what created all this. She waved her hand, indicating the environment surrounding them. What about the drugs and crime? And you're taking our jobs. I don't deal in terms of crime. If you haven't noticed, I'm creating jobs. I guess so. But this time he was feeling the need to cross his legs. Oh, so she said, I'm keeping you from your business. He nearly fell over, spilling around one foot and then stopped. Yeah, ma'am, Shoshi. Which way again? She almost laughed. You want the caballero, sir. Later, feeling better, he walked out of the restaurant, listening to the lively music. The lyrics were in Spanish, and so were the conversations coming from the kitchen and the tables. There were also some English. People having a good time. Him too, actually. Icy air blasted him. He stepped out. It was snowing. He buttoned up his jacket. An old white guy blocked his way. He wore a gas mask and a faded cap with the name of the old president, just like Burst. Hey, bro, what do you think you're doing? I just had lunch. Don't you know that Mexican food is laced with genetically engineered mind-altering viruses? They'll make you accept their invasion. Eat too much and you'll become one of their slaves. You're sounding pretty sci-fi there, buddy, Bert said. And I don't feel like a slave. Not now, but soon you'll be taking orders from them, learning Spanish, and you can talk to them. Look, I gotta go, Bert said, stepping around him. A makeshift-looking drone passed by, emitting a heavily picante smell. An electric bus pulled up. The entire side displayed an animated electronic Bigfoot, which exhaled a cartoon balloon, reminding people to recycle. Bigfoot suddenly was replaced by a smiling, winking Shoshi, inviting people to her restaurant. See, said the stranger, they're everywhere. They've already won. You'll start speaking Spanish all the time. Your skin and eyes. Your hair will turn black. They'll be trying to make us all into Mexicans. And if that don't work, they'll ship you off to a concentration camp where they'll kill you and butcher you up and cook you and eat you. They're all cannibals from way back, you know. Bert turned his back on the guy and threw his cap into the gutter and got on the bus. Welcome to Global Borrow, or should that be galactic or intergalactic?
Thank you, Ernesto.
Okay.
So thanks, Ernesto. I appreciate it. Hang around now. Next, we're going to have a colleague of mine, Scott Russell Duncan, aka Scott Duncan Fernandez. He recently completed a book called The Ramona Diary of SRD, a memoir of growing up native Chicano Anglo, and a fantastical tour reclaiming the myths of Mexican California. Scott received his MFA from Mills College in Oakland, California. He now lives there and writing all the time. He's a senior editor at Somos de Nesquito magazine, and I welcome him to podium.
So thanks for everyone for being here, and I'm sorry for all the people coming in. We had some technical difficulties, so we gave the Zoom link to the world, and they're coming in. But for some reason, it's not working. They should be muted. So So if anybody says anything bad, that's to my story here. This is called. So forgive my Spanglish here. So it's called Vigilantes Oscuros. Dark Watchers, and this is something I've studied. Background of California, Mexican California, native myths and stuff like that. And I'm like, I've never heard, I'm old now, in my 40s, right? And I'm like, look, I've never heard of this. Like, this is like some, and I've never seen this in a book before, and I came across it. So I wrote about the Dark Watchers, just some guys that stand around and watch people, literally. All right. Vigilantes Oscuros. In the news that showed that the news sightings of the Vigilantes Oscuros were pranks by a couple of teenagers, Gregory finally articulated the feeling of being watched his entire existence. Los Vigilantes Oscuros, crepuscular tall spirits in black hats who stood on SoCal hills. They were accounted in history by various bands of California natives and Mexican colonials, and by Gregory's misty feeling of judgment. The watching made Gregory feel stretched out flat, as if he had to justify every element in his surroundings. The teenagers had viewed his photable silhouettes with electric glowing eyes. Motors let them move slightly, and long jackets covered the pranksters below, who moved out as the light fell to complete black. They would fold those Vigilantes Oscuros and hide. It'd be funny at first in the boredom of the potential world's end in the virus lockdown. the dog walkers pointing, the joggers pausing, the children crying as they saw the watchers, and then later needing to be reassured as they thought of the tall, black, swaying silhouettes just before bed. Then the news changed its tone from amusement to manhunt when an elderly woman died of fright. She opened her window to a tall black hat with hellish eyes underneath and looked straight, that was looking straight into her. Clutching her chest on her last call to her daughter, she described the demon watchers and the neighbor boy's amused face that was watching her from the window. The pranksters were caught and pictured on the news in grown-out crew cuts and right-sided smirks that stretched beyond COVID masks because they were handcuffed. The contraptions taken in as evidence. As they hadn't invented Los Vigilantes Oscuros, they always had not produced a feeling of being watched for Gregory, only calling attention to it as he sat alone watching news with watchers. Despite his foreboding, he had never seen sprites or duendes out there in the hills at dusk, not even witness to the robotic kitty prank led up by fantasy and electricity. Gregory couldn't weld this notion to any other in the pantheon of the paranoid. CIA, internet companies, reticulans, vaccine nanobots, immigrants needing work, UFO cults, or time police, though, of course, when there were no's. Let it be Los Vigilantes, let their reason for watching be the answer. He figured there were clues in the name. Vigilantes, Gregory thought, was much like the English vigilant, oscuros, dark, like the English obscure. Almost like unknown watchers, but the real translation is dark watchers. Dark seems more the clue to the wide watching, rather than the sense of presence, the unknown entity observing, judging passively, gathering information for unknown ends. Dark, dressed in capes or hats didn't seem to be correct. Gregory wouldn't be disturbed by Zorro cosplayers wasting their time on the edges of California jogging trails and suburban medians. Dark, referencing when they appeared also didn't fit. Dawn and dusk, the two doors of darkness, really. But Vigilantes exist in the creeping dark and melt away both at night and at daylight. Vigilantes create gustos, that they hear in our therapy. Gregory stood up and stretched. The afternoon was getting old. The day-to-day itself already getting old in the virus lockdown. Los Vigilantes Oscuros are just watching the approaching and receding dark of the world. They're watching people. The darkness of people about the day, blinded by the mundane, excised by witnessing the slicing a sample of humanity and pressing it between glass and a microscope. Hundreds of years of colonization, Los Vigilantes Oscuros only observed. The inundated brutality of servitude pressed under glass. U.S. invasion, the hunting of native people, the displacement, the lynching of Mexican Americans, the Zoot Suit riots, police killings, the deportations and security checks, the children in cages. They greatly beheld the trauma of the world, no, just locally to California. The trauma of brown people, Rasta here on the West Coast, as essential workers died without support, forgotten. Indifference proved with the watching silence for thousands of years, for hundreds of years of occupation and exploitation, and certainly since Gregory's own existence. Twilight and dawn had just enough light to see, not illumination enough for details to know or care enough to even experience the same darkness as everyone else. Gregory went to the window. What's the story, he reasoned, but survival data to relate to others. The dark watchers transmit nothing. It's trauma of warriors. Los Vigilantes Oscuros only watch for entertainment. Gregory opened the window, cool air coming in, though the land had still light, afternoon was leaving. In California, the nights are always cold. Waters from the depths of the ocean rise and take the heat from the air. How could the watchers not act? They have seen. They should know better than anyone the inequities of the world. Shadows began running farther from the hills near his own house. Twilight, Gregory went out. Los Vigilantes know we get shot for nothing. They know they ban our language. They ban us. They say we're foreign. We get exploded and told it's fair. The rat settled out despite himself, the kind only certain kinds of outsiders like to hear. The sense of watching burned him, now more than any other time he could remember. Watchers had to be near. Gregory grabs at your arms, pulling your Vigilantes Oscuros silhouette to the window front. Say something, Gregory grunts. You both struggle, and he has you all the way through the window. All you have to do now is close your eyes, and Gregory will fade away in the darkness you refuse to share.
Thank you very much, Scott. We appreciate it. Gives us an idea of the diversity of the readings and the subject matter. And I'm glad to have Scott as part of our team, really. The next person on schedule is Kathleen Alcala. She's the author of 6 books of fiction and nonfiction The work has received the Western States Book Award, the Governor's Writers Award, and the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association Book Award. Designated an island treasure in the arts on Bainbridge Island in Washington State, Kathleen's work will be included in the Palabra archive of the Library of Congress. Kathleen, give us a little context and read us your story.
Thank you, Armando. Tonight I'm going to read from the very first chapter of a work in progress called Oscar and Natalia and Oscar. And I'll let you decide whether or not this is an optimistic or a pessimistic view of the future. And thanks to everybody else, you've been troopers. When they first met, he called himself Oscar and she was Natalia. It was not a big romance, but it was fun. He was shy and she was garrulous. She could talk the ear off a pub crawler back in the days that she worked as a bartender. Some came just to listen, to feel the stream of words pour out of her mouth, a liquid dictionary. As for Oscar, his realm was numbers. He carried a slide rule in his pocket, a talisman from the past, although no one knew what it was for. It looked like a fancy ruler for people who needed to measure things exactly. Their cat was also named Oscar, which could be confusing, but usually Oscar the human could tell that Natalia, also human, was probably not yelling at him for spreading kibble all over the kitchen floor. Oscar liked to pick a bit up in his teeth, move it out of the bowl, and carefully lay it on the floor, where Oscar or Natalia might step on it with a crunching sensation and grind it underfoot. You could also tell them apart because Oscar, the human hipster, wore a pork pie hat. Oscar and Oscar took walks around the neighborhood on days that Natalia was working, just to get the lay of the land. They knew that people talked about them, but they enjoyed each other's mostly silent company. Oscar the human enjoyed the trees, while Oscar the cat enjoyed the smells. It seemed at times to Oscar the human that Oscar the cat was on the verge of saying something more than meow. Then the big pulse came. It was 4:51 in the morning. Oscar remembered this because something he could not name woke him. He looked at the clock just as the numbers faded away. It was the last electronic communication he would receive, and he thought of it often. The bright numbers against a black background, the darkness of the room, Natalia still breathing softly in her sleep. Over the next few hours, all electrically dependent systems failed. A few solar and wind farms continued, but every time an electronic connection was made, a rampaging fire broke out, so that windmills kept turning, solar panels gathering soul, but they could not and would not connect to anything that made a spark. People speculated that the composition of the atmosphere had changed, but no one really knew. The bar where Natalia worked switched to kerosene lamps. At home, they used candles. Oscar was afraid of them and made sure they were used only in the middle of a table with no papers or flammables about. "I can see you," said Oscar, moving his head back and forth to gaze at Oscar through the flames. "I can see your eyes. What are you thinking, Oscar, after struggling to read for half an hour or so, would remove his glasses and smile at Oscar. Then they would take a nap until Natalia came home. As a longtime employee, she worked the late afternoon shift and was free at dusk. Sometimes Oscar and Oscar would meet Natalia outside the bar and walk her home. The world was changing around them and they wanted to see it all. They talked about getting a horse and wagon and traveling down the coast to Mexico, where people made better candles. They considered shutting up their little house for a while, which stood at the back of a property. Their landlord lived in a larger house at the front edge of the property and was especially grateful to have Oscar and Natalia as his renters. They were steady and tidy, prompt with the rent, and by keeping the house occupied, discouraged the bands of marauders who had begun plundering the cities and towns at nightfall. He did not want them to go caravanning to Mexico. He was afraid they would never return. A quest, said Oscar, standing one foot on a chair in a triumphant pose. Almas para mi calabaza, said Natalia, putting her foot on another chair, getting her holidays mixed up. To life, said Oscar the cat. What? Said Oscar the human. What? Said Natalia. What? Said Oscar the cat. I want to go questing too. Now, don't get the wrong idea. This did not come out of the blue. Ever since the Big Pulse, strange things had been going on. Some people thought the pulse might have rewired all our brains. Others blamed the mysterious object that passed through our solar system in 2017, an object greatly resembling a solar sail that traveled 4 times the speed of a typical meteor, leaving behind more mystery than answers on the human landscape. Oscar insisted that he had been talking all along and they just had not been listening. Preparing for their walkabout seemed to have opened Oscar and Natalia's ears to Oscar's commentaries, sometimes witty, sometimes dull. The house did not contain much that would interest marauders: a bed, a table and 4 chairs, and a lot of books. Since the Pulse, they'd been heating and cooking on a hibachi, careful to bank the warm coals after cooking so they would gradually keep warming the little house through the night. The worst that could happen in their absence, they decided, was that someone searching for shelter would break in and accidentally burn the place down. I would miss my book, said Oscar. I would miss my blanket, said Oscar. We can take that with us, said Natalia. Walking south with Oscar in a backpack, they came to a farm and arranged to borrow Romano, a lovely gelding with a shiny brown coat. Natalia's great-grandparents had raised horses before the revolution, and she walked around Romano with a critical eye. Oscar did some calculations with his slide rule. Good, she said. Not too spooky. We might see some exciting things on the way. With Romano, he said, we should be able to reach Aguascalientes by October. The farmer helped him modify a flat wagon he used for moving hay around into a simple box with a seat across the front. A cover on a swinging hinge allowed them to open up to the night sky when they wanted, counting the stars. Usually, they were in someone's fenced yard by then, close to settled people for safety. This was not always ideal, but it was practical. People were hungry for news of the greater world, and everything the Oscar and Natalia saw confirmed what they had heard. The preppers were the first group to devolve into ruin. They had the supplies and the guns, but they mostly fought with each other until the sane ones left, disavowing any responsibility for the violence, trying to cover or worse, scrape off their tattoos. The next to disperse were those who had walled themselves off from the general population. With no practical skills, they needed to hire people to work for them. But all their money was in banks, which no longer existed. Finally, the people who could not reimagine themselves had the hardest time as individuals. Once a day trader, always a day trader. Converting their skills into practical outcomes in a non-digital world proved difficult for those lost in the virtual clouds. Other people took a good hard look at themselves. They realized they could still teach and grow or prepare food, still whistle through their teeth. What had once been a hobby became a means of survival. When they needed food or shelter, Natalia and Oscar would fold down the roof and provide a little spontaneous teatro campesino. Natalia had a singing voice strengthened by yelling at barbozos. It carried outdoors, especially since the outdoors had grown quiet without cars, planes, and factories in operation. After singing and drumming to gather people around the wagon, Natalia and Oscar would interweave songs and drama with gossip about the locals, providing shocking detail to their accounts. This led to much-needed laughter. No one knew that Oscar the cat walked around each town ahead of time, listening and watching their goings-on and reporting back to his humans. The trio also brought news from the towns to the north, wherever they had visited. There was seldom word from the east, and it was never reliable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. it so happens that the next reading includes a cat, and this cat does not talk. Thank goodness. I'm sorry, I forgot I didn't have the microphone in my hand. But I was telling Kathleen that the next reading does have a cat in it. And this cat does not talk, but he does purr in a certain way. It's my pleasure to introduce myself. I happen to be the last speaker or last reader for the event tonight. And the story that I'll be reading from is from the book, the fifth book that I wrote in a series called The Adventures of Noldo and His Magical Scooter. As the title might suggest, it's intended for young adults. Some people have told me that much older, that they've enjoyed reading it for themselves. It is based on my birth site, which is San Antonio, in the West Side Barrio. I now live in Berkeley, California. And I happen to be the author of Chicano Manifesto, which came out in 1971. When I retired after a long career as a writer-editor, I turned to writing, and I found that writing for young adults was something I really enjoyed doing, and had a lot of fun doing as well. I have to say I'm founder and editor of Somos en Espíritu Literary Foundation, which is bringing this event to you tonight along with Medicine for Nightmares. By the way, I don't thank you enough for having us here, by the way, Ricardo. So give me a moment. These are a couple of chapters from a book called The Wizard of the Blue Hole. It's the fifth in the series, and it's based on an actual artifact in San Antonio, that might be the right word, which is the headwaters of the San Antonio River, which are sort of northeast of the city itself. San Antonio is built on an aquifer, and there's a lot of water underneath the city, and rivers actually, I'm told, run underneath. It's called Friends of Joint Forces. The drops that Don Manuel had taken did their work. He managed, with Noldo's help, to stand and shuffle to a chair in the front room, to the table where Noldo recalled the sip from one of the bottles there had touched on one of his adventures a couple summers ago. For a few moments, the old man rested in the chair, his head bowed down, his arms quivering as Noldo held him around the shoulders, trying to steady him. The candles sputtered around him. Pepe rumbled quietly on a nearby easy chair, his fur glistening wet. Where he been? Outside? Did he sneak in when I came through the door? Noldo's head began to ache. The flickering lights, the pungent smell of copal, the low rumble of a mystical creature. Concerned, he felt for his old friend, combined to make his head spin. Hold on, the man called in a whisper. Noldo leaned forward to hear clearly what the curandero was saying. A while ago, an old friend of mine, a curandero like me, showed up during the storm. We grew up together at the time I grew up on the border. His voice trailed off for a moment. We apprenticed to a very powerful curandero who was known among the peoples of the colonias up and down the Rio Bravo. Manuel's voice grew stronger as the drops he had taken seemed to buck him up. His name was Fausto. We were good friends, always together as young men, both of us dedicated to learning the arts of healing so as to help our communities. But he has turned that. Manuel sat up straighter in his chair, his shoulders and arms no longer trembling. The worst seemed to be over. Noldo pulled a chair from the corner and sat to listen. What did this Fausto do to you? Senor, are you injured? Noldo asked, no, I'm not hurt. At least no bones broken. Foster caught me off guard. The clicking of tiny teeth made them turn quickly toward the kitchen. The curtain would swing, and coldness looked over their hands and faces. Noble felt as if some unseen force was pressing in on both sides of his head. For a moment he felt woozy. "Oh, Noble," the old man cried out. "Some of his poder is still in the house. What is he doing? What is he planning?" Don Manuel grabbed Noble's hand. The boy's eyes snapped shut. Flaring lights burst in his head. He saw yellow, red, and pink swirling inside his brain. Don Manuel had placed his hand on Noble's head, forming a cup like a helmet over him. "Ah!" Noble cried. "Don Manuel is fighting the bad guy inside my head." In a few moments, as the curandero held him, the fireworks inside his head fizzled out. He felt calm again, and even a bit more clear-headed. The body of the healer had used his own powers to help Noble. Foster chose the wrong path. He grasped the power of healing and turned it into one of destruction. His energy sought you out to harm you. You're not just strong enough to resist him alone. What does he want, Senor? He has come back to San Antonio for revenge. The founded healer went quiet for a few moments as if gathering his strength. Noble quickly retrieved the taza filled with water and brought it to Don Manuel. To take a sip, the man continued. And while the sun still lit the sky red to the west, remember? Storm clouds raced in all of a sudden, they burst like water balloons. I've seen you and your friends go at each other. You had so much fun. Well, God is quickly ran with rain. I hurried to the back of the house to close the shutters and the windows. You know, that's where the storms hit hardest. I opened the back door to bring in a couple of chairs. I didn't want to get wet. Suddenly, lightning lit up the sky, and there he was, Fausto. Under that big mustache of his, he looked like Zapata. He flashed his white grin. He was dressed all in black, and in darkness I could see only his face and hands. I started to call out to him. "Manuel," he shouted at me, "remember me in your last moments. You will find your tomb below the city, and the river will be mine." Lightning struck again. It also seemed to have drawn the lightning toward him. With the flick of his hands, the force hurled me back into the room. I stumbled, my body seemed aflame. I tried to get away, took a few steps into this room, but fell back. The last sound I heard was the back door slamming shut, as if a great hand had pushed it shut. Then I slipped into darkness. With Noble's help, his old friend shuffled over to a stuffed chair in one corner of the room. Several shelves full of books lined the walls. Noble had long wanted to read every one of them, but he hadn't dared to ask the old bell. Maybe now. Tell me how this all got started, Don Manuel. If you love it, of course. I must tell you, Noble. You must help me keep the knowledge and traditions alive. Jesus, what does Don Manuel mean? What do I know about anything? You know more than you think, Noble. But more importantly, you have a spirit of what I am about to ask you to do. Yes, Don Manuel, I want to help you in any way I can, but wait, you see what I was thinking. Noble, I know that you're concerned about me and want to help. You will have to learn many things quickly. Fausto is mad, desire for revenge. I am sure that he wants to gain control over whatever activity in the city will bring him wealth and control. When he spoke of my tomb below the city and how the river will be his, he paused. That is again, Noble. I think that he believes he can take control of the city by controlling the river. In other words, the flow of water. It sounds crazy, Don Manuel. Noble said, how could one crazy guy control the river? I don't know, Noble. We don't know about how the river works. Maybe he thinks he can control the water. He's sorry. But I stand in his way. My own health is fading. Somehow, Foster appeared young and strong. I'm sure it is for calling upon the power of evil in the world. You must stop him. Don Manuel, what can we do? Thank you very much. I might add that the whole idea of the river, you mentioned this, San Francisco on an aquifer. And the aquifer becomes very much a part of the story, almost like a character in itself. But as with all the other stories, you have to buy the book to read the message.